Greetings, everyone. Nick Ottinger once again, presenting you guys a Pro Track guide at Atlanta Motor Speedway. This will be our 2008 oval configuration this week in the Xfinity Series, and I'm going to kind of dive into some quick bits of how we need to attack this track, of course, some attributes this car will have, and the avenues we need to get the most out of the car, and just kind of keep it consistent and the characteristics that we need to keep in the car, but also how we can attack the track to keep yourself consistent as well. So, just to dive into this quite often at the start of the sessions and these videos, we are running the Tata version this week, and the reason being is I feel considering we might have a wide range of track temp this week, could be anywhere from 79 to 102, 105-degree track temp. So ultimately, I feel this is the best avenue to keep good positivity in the front and rear connected. Doesn't matter what track temp it is. I feel pretty confident with our tighter version this week for any type of parameter, as I do benchmark and looser as well. This is just for me. I really think tighter has the best start, mid run, and long run for what we need to tackle. And to factor on some adjustments later on to a run or a race, I feel we'll have some pretty good, possibilities in creating better, stability in this car and pace out of this one. So, give you guys a little baseline here. Our weather is definitely in the mid ballpark, I would say, what I was just elaborating on. We're at 91-degree track temp, and I'll show you guys like I do every time at the start of these videos, just our weather parameters here. So, I'll give you guys a quick baseline on our inside driver's perspective that you see at this moment, and then also touch and base the chase view perspective for stuff that we need to kind of look at on the outside so it'll help you guys. So give you guys a little quick dive into turn one. I know you guys can't see exactly, because we're not right up close, but there's a NASCAR Cup Series logo here. That is going to be point I'm loading the front end to turn into turn one, turn into the banking to help get my trajectory and point where it should be. And just to touch base on that again, that's loading the car before I get to the Cup Series. Doesn't mean I'm actually turning away from it. I'm just loading the front tires with a little bit of wheel input to actually help my left point off the throttle and, you know, timing of how much I can actually turn the wheel into the corner and timing at that same exact approach of wheel angle, timing my deceleration rate of the throttle. So I'm gonna let this play for one lap and we'll cover this, in depth on what we need to have handling wise into the corner, center, and exit. I'll let this play and we'll stop it for the second lap. Alright, I'm gonna slow this down right about now. As you guys can tell, 91 track temp. We're still not completely off the throttle, and it's very important to recognize that. Alright, so something we just talked about, turning into turn one, this Cup Series logo, and this is running the bottom lane. Remember this, running the bottom lane, trying to wrap this white line. Loading the front end right here, and now I'm starting to turn completely away from it, angling into this banking zone of turn one. And believe it or not, there's actually a small crest once you get closer to that Cup Series logo where you actually start compressing as we would at Dover that we had this past week. It is a small area where we really compress the front end and really can have an upset balance from front to rear depending on what you do driver characteristic wise, your driving technique. So again, it's very important to make sure you're pointing where the line you want to get to. It ain't just to get there sharp and straight, it's just to make sure you're getting there connected from front to rear. And let's watch this deceleration rate, and this is to open the run with. So I'm gonna go to about 15 laps to the run, and I'll go to 25 laps to the run, and then I'll go to lap 30, so you guys can see the perspective of how the line shifts and our characteristics to keep that momentum up. It's very important to make sure we're not just getting back to throttle as heavy as we need. It's just to make sure we're keeping the car stable as possible to allow yourself to make momentum, not to just have momentum. It's to make sure you have the opportunity to create momentum as well. So let's dissect this slow rate of lift point. So we're loading into this banking. You're going to notice a dashed line coming up right here. Right here in the middle of the Atlanta really turn one signage on the wall. As you can see, just a faint view of this at the moment. You can see how much part throttle I'm carrying. The reason I'm using this angle to the corner, where I start adding more wheel input once I start low, getting to a less percentage of throttle, is to make sure I have the front connected, make sure I have the front turning. It's not just to abruptly turn down into the corner and put it in this instance. Let's say we have our steering angle that we have right here, which is pretty minimal to be frank with you, but we're almost getting to the limits of the front tires to make sure we're not slipping them. Now factor it with or part throttle. If you take in half that percentage, you may actually create a tight sensation in the car going into the banking of the corner. How you actually compress the front into the car, into the corner, and the rear. So you may actually have it tighter at that moment because you're using less throttle, which is something that is going to be a challenge this week in recognizing what you need to have balance wise on entry and loading into our compression of entry. So remember that. That's something we'll cover in our session. And if you guys partake in it this Sunday, is how we keep the balance of this car neutral and stable on entry to where we can really wrap the corner how we need to. But here, just to dissect this again, you see our weight painted box here, this our dash line, and that's going to be our avenue to recognize, hey, we need to make sure we have a good consistent balance here. So I would not add too much throttle here. I would not add too much wheel because as you guys are probably accustomed to as well, my cars will probably start hitting the splitter just a couple brief moments, and this is generally the area it hits, somewhere right around here in this Atlanta turn one signage area. And it's when we're crossing this seam and loading into a little bit more of a corner load phase right here where the front just goes down. So factor that in. This will get better mid run, long run. It'll get better after 5 laps. It's just one brief moment that will be recognizable for you as a driver to say, hey, if I'm hitting this and I'm getting offline, I'm doing something wrong once I'm hitting that phase here of the splitter. Like I'm hitting it right now, it starts compressing. So as you can tell, I keep the same angle. I'm actually pointed back down where I need to be. But if you're hitting that splitter and going straight or getting offline by a tire width, there's something we have to factor in of what am I doing different and maybe incorrect. Maybe too much wheel angle before it. It may be not enough wheel angle with the part throttle that we have here, or it may be a combination of too much throttle and too much steering angle where you're carrying too much speed at that moment. So again, this track is very dependent on creating straight drive, creating momentum, and keeping our momentum consistent in the same phase where we need to create it. So just to factor that into our thought process is what we need to wrap this corner as efficient as possible. So as this radius is, it's not a complete, when we're following this weight line, you have a lot more grip hugging this weight line with putting the left front on the apron. Now, you have a loose car, just to give you guys a baseline. If you're trying to drive right on top of that weight line and you're putting the left front, really the inside of or outside of the left front on that apron, you're also going to de-wedge that car, creating a little bit more of a loose condition, depending on how much steering angle you have and depending on how much throttle percentage you have in the car. So factor that in to time where you're actually getting to that white line. It's not too early, it's not too late, but you have the capability to hold that angle that you need to for your center and for your mid exit to help you power off the corner as straight as possible. Because factor of the matter is this track is really right rear dominant in torching the right rear tire, and your handling attributes are very, very important to make sure you're getting the right front and right rear connected. And right front getting down to the corner, the right rear's not over slipping because you're free in, or vice versa, you're tight and you're not over slipping in the right front because you just can't get the car to turn. So just to dissect this a little bit more, our center to mid exit. It's not a perfectly like a sphere. It's not like a circle to where you have the same exact radius and you know degrees of a turn radius here. So this is going to actually have a little bit of a positive ability short run here. Front's connected. I actually start having to make sure I'm not getting to that left front too early on this paint because I want to make sure I'm actually getting to the exact area from center to mid exit of 2 right here that you see, and make sure I'm actually holding that white line at the right angle I need to. Again, this is all about angles and timings in racing. That's what makes an efficient driver one of the best on a consistent basis, is recognizing our angles and timings to where we can make lap time. So again, you can see here we have a little bit of a sharper turn radius here with this white line, but then it's going to start opening up back up a little bit. Turn radius, and it's going to start opening back up, and then it's going to have a really aggressive radius that we need to actually cover if we're going to run this white line and getting to make sure we're not getting offline and opening the wheel up too early. So it's generally this area. You're going to notice it's at pretty much the middle of this Bojangles billboard. But if you have your left front, and you can see how much spark throttle I'm still having. I'm going to slow this down again so you guys can see it. Spark throttle in this whole stage and phase right here, because you can see how sharp of a turn radius it is and how much it opens back up, and then you have to start turning back to hold that line that you need to. And it's very important you get this area down. You get the center and mid exit phase all the way correct in how you need to run this line, because it obviously changes the angles quite often at this track. You think it actually wants to actually have a sharper angle and you can follow it, but it starts opening back up to a straighter approach, and then you have to start angling that corner back again. So it's very important just not to do too many corrections. You got to make sure you're understanding that center to mid exit, how you can actually wrap it to keep some active grip to the left front. And this bend here near this Bojangles sign that I'm right that you not able to see at this moment, but you got to make sure you're getting this left front activated here, and then you can start having the approach to get off the corner either lower or start opening the radius of the corner up, how you see fit as a driver. So this whole phase here, this is generally on new tires, old tires, doesn't matter what point of the run that you have to factor in to get to partially on partial throttle, and making sure you're carrying momentum and trying to regain that momentum back before here. And then this is the point where you see here, I'm just trying to maximize my drive off the corner. So I start opening it up, and you can see pretty pretty efficient, opening of the corner. So turn 3, you don't really have a big marker here, but try to use it visually. And I'm more of a field driver anyways. I don't like to use markers. I just recognize based on what I need to feel in the front end, and then I can recognize the distance I'm trying to cover or that's ahead of me, and that I can look at to where I need to attack something better or different. So turn into the corner, again, loading the front end up a little bit, and this is going to change the same approach that we talked about lift points. It's going to change later on to the run to where this is probably going to happen earlier, and we'll cover that a lap 15, 25, and 30. So You can tell I'm turning into the corner. I'm not starting my left point until I get well into it on, obviously cold tires at this moment. But I'm starting my left point pretty linearly to a certain area, keeping the balance how I need to neutrally, making sure the front has all the capability I have, but I'm not getting to that limit of it at all. I'm making sure I'm keeping the radius and a smooth approach to the entry. And very important for turn 3 is you don't overshoot this phase of Cup Series logo with your partial throttle and steering angle, the same thing that we do for turn 1. Make sure you don't overshoot that. And once again, once you cross that seam on the right side, on your right front, right rear tire, that's generally an area that you got to recognize. Okay, I don't need to tense up, but I need to be technical in this whole phase of getting to the white line. And if you can wrap this white line as long as possible, and really just keep momentum and recognize you don't need to have a lot of throttle into this zone. You just need to have the correct approach to loading into the banking because it's a bumpier section than turns 1 and 2 is as far as your landing zone and carrying that all the way to the center. So you can see in partial throttle, and you can see it's just very simple like how center to mid exit of turn 2 was. You have a lot of different angles and trying to wrap this white line. It's not a consistent degrees of radius that you would expect. So it's something just to remember. Closer you get to it, obviously, you gotta recognize the bumps are there, partial throttle, and new tires you're gonna be able to rip however much you really need throttle wise, center to exit. So, again, that's just something to cover in that aspect for cold tires and what we'll look at. And we'll go into our lap 15 to see how much that changed. You can tell we basically almost have 1.5 seconds of fall off realistically at this stage of 15, 16, or 17. So let's go to 15. We'll recognize our approach. Same approach, turning away from it, loading it in, partial throttle, and you can see how much less throttle I have in going into cresting this zone and then loading into the banking. More wheel, less throttle. That's because the front tire is starting to get a lot of heat into them. Pace is obviously slowed down. The rear tires are getting more heat into them. Pace is starting to have slowed down because of security on entry. So you just got to keep the car balanced and neutral. Keep your wavelength and thinking, okay, I need to get this car and center approach correct, and not get back to full throttle just to get back to full throttle. But this whole zone, I'm gonna play this from Cup Series all the way to the center. You can tell I'm getting partial throttle back at a decent smooth rate, but I'm not having to correct a ton, and just because I'm going back to 100% throttle. If you're going back to 100% throttle, you're overslowing entry, and then you're really being really active and trying to make time back up. And if you get to 100% throttle, you're costing yourself tire life and consistency in how you need to load the car. Because once you get to 100% throttle, you're going to lift the splitter up. You're going to require a lot of the grip in the rear to actually have all that lateral grip and longitudinal grip at that one moment, and you're just not going to have it at this track, especially 15 laps to a run on the bottom side. So you can see I'm trying to wrap this bottom again, just like I was doing on cold tires, but now since we got some heat and paces obviously lacked some from cold tires, you could tell I'm trying to wrap this line a lot more consistent, trying to keep this grip on this, on this painted line to the left front. So at this zone, back it up here a little bit, slow this down. I get down a little bit lower than you've seen on cold tires, wrapping it, a little bit of correction back, and lap 15 I can wide open that aspect just because of how I actually took the entry, using that grip on the painted line. So slowing it down, you can tell, look how early I have my lift point now compared to new tires, lap 15, lifting already to keep in the balance, because once you get past 10, 11 laps, once we get to our transition period of this car, you can actually, with all this wheel angle we're going to have on entry, if you just dump the throttle, you can actually have a pretty sharp and abrupt, point down to this painted line. So it is up to you as a driver to recognize that, hey, I don't need to drive in 20 car lengths deep just to, make time. I need to be the most efficient to not scrub right front, scrub right rear, and just keep the right rear dominant on entry. You don't want to have a loose condition again. So I'm keeping part throttle, still part throttle, crossing the seam. Again, pretty limited throttle comparatively speaking to what we had before. And wrapping this line as much as possible. And just driving straight off the corner. So this straight drive, you can tell I'm having the car pretty neutral balanced right here over the seam, bumps and seam off the corner. And I'm just trying to drive as straight as possible and not slip the car. So we're going to go to lap 25, which will be our last lap on the bottom. And our lap 30, just for instance, is going to be on the top. But just to cover this a little bit again, lap 25, bottom side, I'll show a chase view of this. You can tell we had about a half second more fall off compared to lap 15, and that's just 10 laps. Part throttle, still part throttle here, very limited part throttle, but I'm getting to the bottom earlier. And that's just to make sure I'm getting the car turning as much as I need, wrapping bottom here. And once again, you guys can see it. My partial throttle to 100% throttle moment is in this general area like we were having at cold tires. So something to factor into. Hey, just focus on straight drive off there. And you're going to notice the same thing with turn 3 here. That's going to be a little bit of a same lift point, but I'm turning it a little earlier. Less throttle than I had lap 15. And as soon as I load into turn 3, same thing. Letting the front be connected. It's pretty bumpy through here as well, so don't get yourself offline. Just keep yourself thinking on how you need to attack this weight line. Keep part throttle. And the longer you can grip that weight line, the better off you'll be keeping some stability in the right rear tire itself. But again, this grip on this weight line can be induced to where you free this car up even more because you're driving on top of that paint and you're trying to use more wheel angle, you're trying to increase throttle. It's very important just to understand the shaping of wheel that you need to have, like we mentioned before. Get off the bottom. All right, now we're going to dive into our 28 here, rip the top, how we need to attack that. So the higher you get to turn 1 here, pretty consistent, obviously. Lift points at that Cup Series logo, this time on the top side. Partial throttle here as well. So you don't have as much room for error as you do on the bottom. Remember this. So the more throttle you carry into this crest of turn 1 just before, the more error you do not have to get that throttle back and completely off of it and keep the front positive. So you just do not want to overdrive this whole zone right here. You just want to make sure you're focused on your high speed momentum loss, which is why the top side is advantageous at this track. But you can definitely burn through the stuff quite often. So the closer you get to the top, better off you'll be in creating some stability. I'm holding part throttle. So we'll talk about handling here on how this car likes the top side. Why it likes the top side is because you can actually carry that center momentum that you don't have to minimize like you would on the bottom. You don't have to minimize that throttle and speed all the way into the center and at center. You can just create that momentum from center and keep that momentum really limited at a certain phase better than you can on the bottom. So it's going to create a lot of time. You want to keep the balance as much as you can here. You don't want to get to full throttle all the way before here because all you're going to do is you have to get back offline. You got to make sure the left rear is connected, to help you drive off the corner, but also the right rear is not underutilized because of you getting tight with all that throttle you have too early. So you can tell here, I'm getting to full throttle any moment around the Bojangles sign again, and that bend, I'm getting closer to it, but it's actually delayed because of how much more speed we're carrying than we would on the bottom. And it's a tighter radius because we're having, you know, less room for error as well. So that's something just to look at up here. Make sure we get close to the wall. We don't just drive up to the wall and run into it, because it's more bumpy at probably the 25% to 45% mark of 1 and 2 up top. So I just ran a pretty good lap here. Used this momentum wrapping this bottom from 1 and 2, and you can tell it's a pretty efficient lap. The 64 compared to my 65 I ran 3 laps before. And we'll run the probably top here. We get up a little bit more momentum, keeping it pretty consistent. Pretty much maximizing the top side there. And this line will be up top as well. You can tell just how bumpy it is up here, how easy it is just to get loose. And that's because of how much throttle we use. If we use 5-10% less here, instead of having to correct over these bumps, you may feel pretty active in just keeping it neutral. But again, it's pretty bumpy up here, so it's easy to get offline and into the wall. So this whole radius from center to mid exit of 4, center 3 and 4 and mid exit of 4, it's really easy to slip this tire and push a loose into this car, or even push the fronts off, because you're really focused on getting to the throttle too early. You can tell here I'm not full throttle, but I'm also breaking loose at the same moment of just trying to wrap this, seam. And it's just because of how tight and narrow turn 4 exit gets. It's that area of how loose it is up here, but also how narrow exit of 4 it gets, because I can't power off as smooth as I could off of 2. So something to look at. We'll look at chase view here so you guys can see a good perspective. It's not not just wall riding, getting close to the wall, even though it's pretty active on how, closer you get, the tighter you actually get, and more grip you can actually sustain up there. So, again, really wrapping this bottom. I'm going to show this actually in, I'm going to go back to lap 29, showcase this in TV1, so you guys can see that perspective, just how high I get. That car's cool looking, by the way. Alright, let's watch top side 3 and 4 here. Just see how bumpy it is. See how easy and some tire marks how it's laying in this phase right here. Let's just get a chase view. A little bit of tire marks here. And that's just how loose I was right there. So again, you gotta be just on it. Make sure you're not overcompensating the steering angles, all that stuff, because all the throttle input you have. So, but this track is very unique. It is very tough, very challenging just to drive, let alone race others. So, how I've always approached this track is just driving to my potential, driving to the car's potential, and recognizing how can I best make those two work as a driver and connecting the car to what I'm doing and what I want it to do. And if I'm screwing up my entry, it's not going to work out of this track. If I'm screwing up that partial throttle of, lifting, this phase, even on the top side, if I'm lifting and just trying to drive in there too far and having to get out of the throttle all the way, once I load into this zone, I'm gonna get offline and tie this small range of compression near the wall. I'm just gonna lose too much time because I overshot my entry, and then I'm having to lose time center to mid exit of 1 to 2, and that's going to carry my momentum into 3. So just remember, entry is going to be the biggest factor. We got to, factor in at this track to consistently hit and not overshoot. You want to have the balance where you need to, and you want to make sure you're the most active at that zone, and then you're keeping yourself honest in center to mid exit and keeping the car stable so you can have a straight launch off the corner. So just something to always keep your mind at a track like that, like this, that has a lot of low grip and feels like you don't have a lot of right rear stability to rely on. And fact is, you don't a lot of times because that's the way this track is. So this is going to cover it for us this week for Atlanta Motor Speedway, and I hope to see you guys in our collective group session this Sunday. And if you got any questions, please reach out, DM me on Discord, whatever you've got a questions or you're just sending me the riddle. I love when you guys send me your riddle answers and stuff like that. So it's a fun little game we play on that. So, but any questions, please reach out, guys. I appreciate you guys tuning in once again.